Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
I do not trust vegans. A horror story from Reddit. r/scary stories. Hi. My name is Michael Blackburn, I am 25 years old, and I do not trust vegans. It is not because of the reasons you might think. I do not trust vegans not because of their obnoxious, overbearing, pick-me personalities. Although those that specifically turn being vegan into their only attribute and try to force everyone around them into veganism are especially annoying. No, I do not trust vegans because my ex was a vegan, and Neil, well, he was an asshole. He did not start out that way though. I suppose nobody really does. Neil was more like my knight in shining armor in the beginning. He rescued me. Literally and figuratively. Neil and I met when I was going through a tough time. I had just broken up with my ex, Steven. Things were not the best at work. I worked for a competitive marketing agency. And with all that going on, my rent doubled and the lease on my apartment was about to end. I needed to find somewhere more affordable to live, which in Denver was nigh impossible. I convinced myself a hike was just the thing I needed to clear my head. The Colorado Trail is where I found myself the day I met Neil. I had gone on a few hikes before, all shorter trails than the Colorado Trail of course, but never so far and by myself. Since I went alone and was a relative beginner, hiking the entire trail was a no-go. The entirety of the Colorado Trail takes 4 to 6 weeks to hike. Instead, that hike was going to be from the Waterton Canyon Trailhead to the South Platte River Trailhead, the first segment of the trail, over the course of a weekend. Day 1, I would hike the 7 or so hours to the end of the segment and set up camp for the night. Day 2 would be spent hiking back down to the start of the trail and to my car. Overall, I would be hiking about 32 miles there and back, 16 miles each day. My end goal was to be too exhausted to even think about the breakup and the numerous other problems in my life. The first day went fine, if not a little long. The skies had been clear, the breeze was nice, and the terrain was not too bad. It got a little tough at times, be it the steep and somewhat slick pathway or the quickly thinning air as I gained altitude. I had gone in the spring too, so that meant I was bug and mosquito food. But, at the end of the day, the view was amazing and made all the hardships worth it. I had set off on the trail early in the morning, beginning the hike at about 8 am. Factor in the estimated time for the first section and a couple half-hour breaks, I ended up reaching my campsite around 4 p.m. That gave me plenty of time to set up my tent and enjoy a nice dinner of roasted hot dogs and a can of baked beans before the sun set. As I wound down and enjoyed my little feast that evening, I noticed a couple of storm clouds rolling in, past the pastel horizon. I thought nothing of it at the time, as the storm did not look too menacing. I knew my tent could take whatever was thrown at it. In fact, I welcomed a little bit of rain. It had gotten very warm during the hike that day. A light storm was just the thing to cool the air down a bit. As soon as I had gone to bed, I heard little patters of raindrops falling onto the outside of my tent. I had been exhausted, but content, and sleep easily overtook me. The sound of rain and light rumbles of thunder in the distance had only aided me to my dreams. At some point that night, the storm passed. What I had not realized was the fog that would settle over the mountain range. Imagine my surprise the next morning when I crawled out of my tent and could barely see 5 feet in front of me. The fog itself was so thick, sticky, and utterly overbearing. I tried to wait out the fog for an hour, but it seemed to be stagnant and unwavering. Having wasted enough time, I packed up camp and tried my best to hike down the trail. I had needed to get back before sundown to make it to work in time the next morning. Somewhere along the way I had taken a wrong turn and gotten myself lost. Only when the fog dissipated for just a moment did I come to realize my unfamiliar surroundings and the grave error I had made. Also, in that brief moment, did this ominous feeling overcome me. Like I was being watched. Stalked. Right before the fog thickened again, I could have sworn I had seen a dark silhouette move off somewhere in the distant tree line. A twig had broken somewhere close by and had pushed me over the edge. Like a dumbass, I just picked a direction and ran, forgetting about the fog entirely. The fog most definitely did not forget about me, or the slick rocks that I slipped on shortly after making my getaway. In a panicked effort to overcorrect my falling momentum and lessen the impact, I shifted weirdly, achieving the entire opposite outcome for which I was hoping. My left foot twisted at an awkward angle as it connected to the ground. I held my scream in as a sharp, stinging pain radiated from my ankle. After a moment of rest, I picked myself up, trying to see if I could hold weight on that foot. The pain resulting from the attempt confirmed that I should try to avoid doing that at all costs. I had sprained it, at worst broken it. After finding a decent walking stick, I managed to limp my way around, in search of rescue or the trail. I had been lost for about 6 hours before he found me. It was late afternoon at that point, nearly evening. I had been resting on a random boulder in a clearing, munching on a protein bar. Thoughts of trying to survive after the sun went down occupied my mind. I had been so lost in thought, I had not noticed Neil slowly approaching me. A soft, "Hey," left his mouth as he emerged from the tree line. Startled, I yelped, then grabbed my walking stick and held it out defensively as a weapon. "Relax, I'm not going to hurt you," the strange man had clarified. "That's reassuring," I huffed. "How do I know I can trust you? We are in the middle of nowhere." The beautiful stranger slowly walked towards me. When at an appropriate length away, he stuck his hand out for me to shake. "I am Neil. Neil Yen." Hesitantly, I shook his hand back, eyeing the man up and down suspiciously. He was tall and lanky. He had green eyes, short black hair, and was not dressed to be hiking. He wore slides, a pair of sweatpants and a blue and white striped V-neck. Neil looked like he was trying to be the Asian version of Harry Styles. "We're not in the middle of nowhere, by the way," Neil commented. I stared at the mountainside behind him, unamused. He conceded. "Okay, fine, we are in the middle of nowhere, but my cabin is not too far away from here. One of my trail cams caught you walking past it. I saw you were injured and came looking for you." "That's not creepy at all," I muttered under my breath. Neil let out a frustrated sigh. "Fine. I will leave you and that stick of yours to spend the night right in the middle of cougar territory." He then pivoted on the balls of his feet, back towards the tree line. "No," I pleaded suddenly, almost falling off the boulder. Neil turned around and looked at me quizzically. I cleared my throat and composed myself. "How far away is this cabin of yours?" Neil smiled before walking over and helping me to my feet. "Come on, the ATV is this way." After finally making it to Neil's ATV, I was surprised he had made it that far wearing those clothes. "So, do you have a name?" Neil asked after I took my seat on the passenger side. He had tried to take my walking stick away from me and put it in the back, but I clung on to it. Just in case I needed it for protection. "Michael." Neil started the ATV and began driving off, to his cabin. "Well, Michael, it's nice to meet you." Inexplicably I somehow felt safe in Neil's presence. Yes, at first, there was the initial hesitation and paranoia that he was a serial killer. But after that short walk, seeing how caring and gentle he had been with me, my opinion of him was starting to change. That is how I rationalized why I was able to drift off to sleep during the ride anyway. I awoke somewhere warm and cozy. I had been on a couch, a fire in the fireplace beside me filled the air with sizzles and cracks. My memories came back to me after a second and I deduced this must have been Neil's living room. Lifting the Indian blanket that was draped over me revealed my injured foot had been elevated on a pillow and expertly bandaged. What the dash? I know my way around the human body, Neil responded from behind me. I stood and turned around, scrunching my eyebrows, finding that an odd choice of words. He was holding 2 steaming mugs in his hands. Are you a doctor or something? Neil handed me a mug. It was full of some sort of tea. I placed it down on the coffee table. I don't like tea. No, an artist, he replied. I then took a closer look around his living room. There was barely any unoccupied space on his walls. Charcoal and watercolor paintings and portraits of strange creatures and weird-looking dragons were everywhere. You painted all these? I asked, impressed. Neil nodded proudly. A silent, awkward tension formed between us. Neil nervously scratched behind his ear. Sorry, I'm not really good with people dash. Oh crap. I shouted, looking out the windows, noticing it was dark outside. What is wrong? What is it? Neil asked, concerned. What time is it? I have got to get down the mountain. I will lose my job if I do not show up in the morning. Calm down, Michael, Neil said, gently sitting me back down on the couch. You're in no condition to be going anywhere right now. Do you at least have phone service up here? I need to make some calls and let my work know what is going on. No, I don't, Neil answered. Well, I also need a doctor, and you just told me you weren't one, so. I also told you I know a thing or two about the human body. Why do not you let me take care of your job tomorrow? I let out a disbelieving laugh. Listen, I am grateful for the help, really, I truly am. I just do not know you. And I am certainly not going to let you talk to my job. I will tell you what, I will drive us down to where we can get some cell service, and I will let you make your calls. Then I will get some medical supplies for your foot, and we will come back. If you think I'm staying cooped up here for an unspecified amount of time, you're crazy. I had tried to stand up and get away from this crazy man, but I slipped and almost ended up falling on my ass. Neil reacted in time and caught me. We stared into each other's eyes for a minute before he gently sat me back on the couch. I cleared my throat, waiting for the butterflies in my stomach to disappear. Not an unspecified amount of time, just a few days. Only until you can walk on your feet better, then I will take you home. Just, think about it for the night, okay? He asked, leaving the room. He did not hear it, but I had said softly, okay. A minute later Neil emerged from his kitchen holding 2 large wooden bowls. In them were giant portions of a delicious-looking salad. Want some food? What are you, a vegetarian? I asked, sarcastically, taking the giant bowl from him. He sat down on the other side of the couch and dug in. There were large pieces of lettuce, kale, and a couple other greens and vegetables I could not place. Chopped nuts and a sweet Asian sauce were drizzled on top. The tea Neil had served me earlier most definitely would have paired well with the salad. I'm a vegan, he replied. The next day, we drove down the mountain in Neil's blue Jeep. I only managed to call my manager and greet him before Neil ripped the phone out of my hands. He then left me in the Jeep while he talked to my boss. He came back with a giant smile plastered on his face. Neil had somehow convinced my boss to put me on paid medical leave until my ankle was fully healed. And, if I got fidgety during the healing process, would be able to work remotely. I do not know what Neil said or what he did, but he lessened the heavy load on my shoulders after doing that. He made it so I could focus on healing instead of working. Neil then drove into town and found a pharmacy. He gave me a pleading look right before he went in. That look said he would understand if I were not there when he got back, but he would be sad if I left. I do not know what compelled me to stay, but I did. Neil was overjoyed to still find me sitting in the passenger seat of his car. We drove back up the mountain and I showered, with Neil fashioning me a nice splint and rewrapping my foot when I was done. I fell asleep on the couch sometime after. When I woke up later that afternoon, Neil was nowhere in sight. His absence gave me an opportunity to properly explore my surroundings. The first thing I investigated was the kitchen. I stole a granola bar from Neil's pantry as I looked around. He was not kidding about being a vegan. The fridge was full of all kinds of fruits and vegetables. His cabinets contained all diverse types of nuts and grains. No meat or animal products in sight. The kitchen itself was small, but chic. There was a small gas stove, a microwave, sink, and beautifully chiseled granite countertops. The flooring, like it was throughout the entire cabin, was a dark stained hardwood. I left the kitchen and found the adjacent dining room. A small, 4-person table occupied the space. Dark wooden chairs accompanied the piece of furniture. More of Neil's artwork hung on the walls. Most of the pieces depicted a weird-looking dragon creature. It had a flat face shaped like a lion's. 2 huge horns sat on its head and a set of razor-sharp teeth jutted out of its mouth. By the looks of it, it was huge. It could be described as a dragon mixed with an ox-like appearance. I made my way back to the expert bed and bathroom, where I had showered earlier. Neil kept his room, his house, very tidy. His king-sized bed was made, and his blackout curtains drawn, cloaking the room in darkness. The only other pieces of furniture were a set of nightstands and a dresser. A large mirror was perched on top of Neil's dresser. Peculiarly, there had been a cloth hung over its reflective surface. There were no pictures of friends and family or drawings in there, the walls were completely barren. Leaving me nothing that told me about the kind of person Neil was. I strolled out of the bedroom and back into the living room. The cabin was 1 floor, and I had searched it thoroughly, not finding Neil. I figured he was outside somewhere and left through the front door. His porch was small and rickety. A rocking chair and small table beside it was the only things indicating that someone occupied the place. Weeds and overgrown bushes littered the sides of the house. The driveway was dirt, go figure, Neil lived in the mountains. I followed a small, almost hidden, stone path along the side of the house to the backyard. Phew, this place is a dump, I commented after finding Neil on his back patio at the end of my little stroll around the cabin. Neil had set up an easel and large canvas. He was in the middle of painting another sort of creature using charcoal. The grass in the backyard was overgrown and weeds pushed through the terracotta tiling, cracking them. Neil's property had so much potential to be exquisitely beautiful. It had been a shame that it was in such a state of disrepair. "It's my dump," Neil said as he continued making strokes on his canvas, brushing the insult off completely. "What are you doing walking around? You should be resting." I shrugged my shoulders. Felt like exploring. A quiet moment passed as Neil continued his artwork. "What is that anyway?" I asked as he sketched another weird dragon-looking thing. "There's like a million others hanging up in the cabin." "It's a nyen," he explained. "A what now?" I asked, perplexed. It sounded like he had just spoken gibberish. "Nyen," Neil sounded out slowly and phonetically for me. "It's a creature from Chinese mythology." "Well, you learn something new every day," was all I could think to say. "Why does it seem so familiar?" "The nyen is associated with Chinese New Year," Neil answered. "You have seen the giant puppet version that people parade around in on TV somewhere. That, and I have a bunch of paintings of it hanging up inside." I nodded my head. "Ah, makes sense." Another moment passed. Interesting," I said, thinking back on shows and movies I had seen the creature in. Neil then put the piece of charcoal down, wiping the black dust off the tips of his fingers on his pants. "Come on, let's get you back inside before you catch a fever." Neil tried to grab my arm to take the brunt of my weight, but I stubbornly shrugged him off. He opted to walk by my side as I pathetically limped around instead. As much as I wanted to, I could not just depend on Neil to do everything for me. "Hey Neil, would you paint me like one of your French girls?" I asked, sitting back down on the couch. He sat next to me, closer than the previous night. "Sure, one day maybe," Neil said with a boisterous laugh, unknowingly beginning to lightly slap my outer thigh. When his laughing fit was over with, his large, but gentle hand lingered on that part of my body. Neil had then realized his actions and quickly stood up, awkwardly clearing his throat. A familiar heat burned in my cheeks. I had been blushing. Suddenly he spoke, "It is getting late. I should make something for dinner. Can you make that salad again?" "It was good," I requested, propping my foot up, making myself comfortable. Neil's smile returned as he politely nodded. He then made his way to the kitchen where I heard him start preparing our meal. As I sat there, I was starting to like Neil's smile. Over the course of those next couple of days, Neil tended to me as my injury healed. We slowly began to trust one another more and began opening. I learned that his parents had died when he was an early age. He had gotten into some trouble in his youth and ended up living as a hermit in the mountains because he was not good with people. Neil learned that I was originally from Utah, had been disowned by my highly religious family for being attracted to men, and that I was not the experienced hiker I thought I was. He did not seem to mind my sensuality, which was a plus, and found my hiking prowess joke to be quite funny. Eventually, after a day of complaining that I had none of my things or my comfortable clothes to wear, Neil brought me back down the mountain and to my apartment. I had done a really dumb, impulsive thing, after arriving at my apartment. I thought we had bonded and formed a connection up in his cabin, so, before he left, I kissed him. Neil was stunned at first. His silence scared me. I felt like shit and apologized a million times, not knowing his sexuality or asking him for consent. I stood there in the doorway of my apartment waiting to be slapped or screamed at. Instead, Neil just kissed me back. Before I knew it, we were both in my bedroom with our clothes off. We might have set my healing progress back a bit that day. That is the fast-track version of how we became a couple anyway. I know, so far, I have portrayed Neil as this kind, caring, stranger and our 2-year relationship as something out of a romance novel. But that is not the whole story. Neil, well, he had always been sort of peculiar. I had known that from the beginning. Over the course of our relationship these unimportant things would happen, randomly. But if you cluster them together looking back over a period of years, a sort of pattern emerges. Neil hated like every holiday for one thing. The 4th of July, New Year's, Chinese New Year, Neil especially hated that day for some reason. Any day that was celebrated with fireworks, Neil could not stand. Do not even get me started on Halloween. Thanksgiving, because he was a vegan, duh. That one was the only understandable gripe. Neil barely tolerated Christmas. Barely. It is Christmas for Christ's sake. I had also come to learn that Neil could be pushy too. We almost broke up because of our dietary differences. I was adamant we could both have our diets, and I was even willing to eat less animal products for his sake. Neil, on the other hand, insisted I strictly eat vegan. Even when he was not around. Then during one fight, he said it was a deal-breaker thing. So, to appease him, I became a vegan. He would always say he could tell when I ate meat and that he could smell it on my breath. Anyway, other than all that, there is one incident I constantly look back on when thinking of Neil. It happened when I was fixing the cabin up after my ankle had fully healed. As a thank you to Neil for his kindness, I decided I would do some much-needed work around the cabin and bring some life into the property. I had just finished the outside of the house. I spruced the front yard up by planting white lilies, red roses, and purple peonies. I revamped the back patio by pulling the weeds, fixing the tiles, and stringing up canopy lights. I also found a cheap, but nice-looking, patio set that I put out there. The best and important thing about the backyard was that there was still room for Neil to paint out there. The outside was perfect, but my next task was to start working on the inside. Before I could start redecorating though, the walls needed a fresh coat of paint. And they needed just a little pop, so I was going to paint a couple of the walls a majestic deep red. I had been in the living room, just having painted a few strokes on the wall, when Neil walked in the front door. He had not been supposed to be back for a couple more hours. I became displeased since I was trying to surprise him with the paint job. I had not told him I was doing it. What are you doing?" Neil asked as he noticed the red streaks on his wall. "I am painting, darling." "What does it look like?" Another stroke of my brush resulted in another red streak. Neil's eyes went wide, and he started to freak a little. "Stop that." I stopped painting as requested. "What? Why? It is a lovely color." "I don't appreciate the color red, Michael," Neil grumbled under his breath, balling his fists up. "Is that like a Chinese thing? Not liking red?" I asked. "Wow," Neil gasped, "that's like really racist, Michael." "And you're like really Chinese, Neil," I retorted. Neil scoffed and crossed his arms into his chest before nodding his head disapprovingly. "You're not really redeeming yourself here." "Oh really?" I said, mischievously raising an eyebrow. I set my paintbrush down and stalked behind him, beginning to seductively rub his shoulders. I whispered into his ear, "How can I redeem myself, then?" "Don't paint my walls red," Neil responded bluntly, my sexual advances not improving his mood like I had planned. I groaned in frustration as I put the lid back on my red paint. I looked at the rusty eggshell-colored wall disapprovingly. "You're lucky I have some paint I can spare," was the last thing Neil said on that matter. It took me a couple more days, but my home makeover was eventually completed. The space seemed lighter when I was done with it. Happier. Neil really liked it too. He did not say it in words, but with his actions. I could just tell he liked having the touch of another man in his home. He liked it so much, we threw a little party after the makeover was done. Just the two of us. There, Neil asked me to move in with him. He had said since I had put so much effort into fixing the place up, it would be a shame if I did not get to live in it. The prospect of taking the next step forward in our relationship was exhilarating. It was so exciting, in fact, that I brushed the red paint incident off like it was just another one of Neil's cute quirks. The day we met was also the day we broke up. The 2-year anniversary of when Neil found me lost on the mountainside. It was also the day I was planning to propose to him. I was a wreck that day, a bundle of nerves and excitement. The engagement had been thoroughly thought out and planned, just needed to be executed. Without a hitch, I might add. Of course, God laughs when you have a plan. Neil had an art installation which meant he would be gone for most of the day. Fine with me since I had a lot to set up. My plan was to romance the shit out of Neil, so he would say yes. Most of the day was spent setting up this grand and romantic spot in the backyard. I had ordered a giant heart made from roses, white because at that point Neil's disdain for red had been embedded in my brain. There was the path of flower petals from the back door to the heart, a bajillion tiny candles, and these adorable little paper lanterns that fastened over the string lights above the patio. The whole 9 yards. The engagement ring had been ready for weeks at that point. Living in my pocket since picking it out at the jeweler's. All that was left was to pick up dinner. Now, Neil and I's favorite food joint was this little hole-in-the-wall Chinese restaurant. The food was greasy, salty, and there were vegetarian and vegan alternatives. We always got the same thing. That night I picked up our usual to-go order but made a slight deviation. The truth is, I had not gone completely vegan. Every now and then, when Neil was not around, would sneak some steak or chicken here or there. Since it was a special occasion, I decided to order myself the regular steak lo mein with extra steak. I also asked for extra impossible meat for Neil so he would not get suspicious. I thanked the workers after acquiring and paying for the food, who wished me luck after I told them my plan, and then I set back off to the cabin in my Ford Explorer. I did not get home until about 7:30 minutes before Neil was set to arrive. Everything was going well until Neil got home. The love spot was ready, the dining room table was set, the only thing left to do was put out our food. I was in the middle of plating our food when Neil walked through the door. My heart started racing and my palms got sweaty. My brain melted and turned to mush as I became a complete nervous wreck. I took off to the living room to greet my soon-to-be fiancé. Neil immediately clocked that something was off the second he saw me. Probably because I was a pale, vibrating mess. "What's going on?" Neil had asked suspiciously. He looked me up and down, noting the navy blue suit I wore. "It's the 2-year anniversary of when we first met, silly," I played it off smoothly. "We never really did anything too fancy for our anniversary the year before and I was not known to be seen in formal wear. I thought I'd do something special." "Right," Neil said, squinting at me. It was obvious he did not know what to make of the situation. He most definitely had not suspected that I was going to propose to him. "Come, sit at the table." Neil followed me to our dining room table and promptly took his seat after I had pulled his seat out for him. After he was seated, I sprinted to the kitchen and finished shoveling food onto our plates. Neil smiled when he had seen I had gotten our favorite. "This looks like a lovely meal, thank you." "Dig in," I said, initiating the meal. Neil obliged by taking a big first bite. His eyes rolled to the back of his head as his tongue tasted the delicious faux meat. Neil let out an almost sensual moan. "Oh, this is so good." I smiled with delight, about to take my own bite, when I realized something was missing. I would forget to pour our wine. I raced to the kitchen to grab our best bottle of white. I grabbed 2 wine glasses out of the cabinet, then returned to the table. I set the glasses down and poured us each a decent amount. I took my seat, then took a sip of wine. Neil had another large mouthful of food in his mouth. "So, how did the installment go?" I asked, taking my first bite. "It tasted good, normal." I slipped my hand in the pocket with the ring box. I fidgeted with it nervously. However, Neil did not answer me. He was too busy shoveling mouthfuls of lo mein into his face. "Relax, it is all yours, Neil. You better slow down, or you will not be able to breathe," I joked. "Why don't you take a sip of your wine?" I ate my second bite. Something was off. I chewed slowly, fully analyzing the flavors on my tongue. My eyes widened as I realized that the meat tasted how it usually did when we got the vegan alternative. But I should have been eating the real steak version. I must have accidentally switched the 2 meals in my haste. Neil was eating real steak. I looked across the table after I realized. I wanted to tell him my mistake, but something was off about Neil. I could tell something in him had changed. He started acting weird. He was slurping his food down like he had not eaten in ages. He had foregone utensils altogether, shoveling meat and noodles into his mouth with his bare hands. He was making a mess. All the while he was making these weird noises. He was moaning and groaning with ecstasy, sounding relieved. About what, I had no clue. "And Neil?" He finished his plate at that point, throwing it behind him when finished. The plate shattered to bits as it crashed on the floor behind him. Neil then looked across the table to see my full plate. More, he growled like an animal as he grabbed my food. He brought his face down to the plate and began eating as if he had been a pig eating out of a trough. I stared in shock and awe as Neil continued to behave erratically. I had never seen him act like that before. It was unsettling. When he was done my portion of food, Neil looked around as if he were in search of thirds. He did not find any more steak lo mein, but he did find me. As Neil looked into my eyes, I could see this primal hunger in them. He took a menacing step closer to me. Neil? Neil! Cut it out, you are scaring me. Meat, he mumbled under his breath, leaping towards me. I shrieked and moved out of the way. Neil quickly regained his balance and stared at me. His eyes. They were black and beady. Sensing he was going to try to attack me again, I darted for safety in the kitchen. Neil chased after me. Buy myself some time, I threw the remaining Chinese food behind me. Neil took the bait. He stopped chasing me and instead got on his hands and knees, licking the leftover food off the kitchen floor. A wave of nausea passed over me as I stood there in a trance, horrified as I watched the man I loved acting crazy. I did not understand. What had happened to my kind, sweet, Neil? All that was left of him was this creature. This asterisk monster. Asterisk. I was beginning to understand why Neil was a hardcore vegan. Something then started happening to Neil's body. It was small at first, barely noticeable, but that quickly changed. Neil's nails grew longer, sharper, darker. He started gaining mass as these large protrusions pushed up from underneath his shirt. Shiny patches of scale started growing on Neil's skin. I booked it out of the kitchen, through the living room, and out the front door. I was about to get in my car when Neil suddenly pounced on me from behind with supernatural speed and strength. Using his sharpened nail, he cut the back of my knee, causing me to fall to the ground. Neil then dragged me back into the cabin, all with a sadistic smile on his face as he licked his lips in anticipation. His face had become semi-human. The other half looked distorted, like something out of his paintings. I screamed and yelled for help, a fruitless effort since we lived in the middle of a mountain. I kicked, wiggled, and grabbed onto anything I could. Please! I cried. Why are you doing this to me? I thought you loved me. I never loved you, Neil hissed, a seething hatred burning in his eyes. I stopped squirming as my heart fell into my stomach. What? More of the Neil I knew kept slipping away by the second. Don't you get it? Neil leaned down, dragging a sharp claw against the skin on my cheek, drawing thick rivulets of blood. He licked my blood off his nail, savoring the metallic taste. We were never partners. You were just my pet. Neil stops, this isn't you, I had said, trying to free myself from his increasingly tight grasp. If he kept going, he would break a bone. Yes, it is. It is who I have always been. Neil brought his disfigured face to my ear and eerily whispered, I was stalking you on the mountain that day. No, I had gasped. Yes, Neil confirmed. I wanted to eat you so badly. I needed to eat you. Then, I took pity on you and decided to keep you around, my little pet. Hot tears stung my eyes. I needed to get out of there. Neil then licked my ear before biting down hard on it with his fangs. In a panicked daze, I shoulder-checked him and got to my feet as fast as I could. What was left of my ear burned like hell. I coupled my hand over the bleeding appendage and made a dash for the backyard. Neil chased after me, my blood and flesh dripping down his chin. I stumbled out of the back door, past the flower petals and candles. As Neil followed, he did not even seem to notice my romantic display. Why would he? He was too busy trying to eat me. In my hurry, I slipped on a stray rose petal. I crashed to the ground, dislocating my shoulder. Flipping on my back to get a visual on Neil, he was carefully stalking up to me. Reveling in the hunt, about to go in for the kill. At my wit's end, I looked around for something, anything, to use to defend myself. My eyes landed on a candle. Something in my gut told me to go for it. I grabbed the hot glass and held it out in front of me. Stay back. In response, Neil backed away, almost cowering. Stay back. I yelled again, louder this time, throwing the candle at him. He yelped and dodged. The unfamiliar expression of fear filled Neil's face, when only a moment ago he seemed invincible. Then I realized, loud noise and the flames spooked him. God damn, how could I have been so stupid? Neil Yen. Nyen. A mix of adrenaline, fear, and anger allowed me to pick myself up off the ground. I looked around the back patio. An idea formed in my head as I saw all the candles I had laid out. I grabbed 2 candles, then ran to the heart made of white roses. I tipped the candle's flames toward the flammable petals that composed the heart. In an instant it was a burning blaze. Neil backed down as he stared at the flames. He roared threateningly as he continued to move away, giving me enough distance to flee. But, as soon as it started, the fire stopped, the intense heat of the flames melting the flowers in mere seconds. My great distraction fizzled out into nothing but a thick, white smoke. With the perceived threat gone, Neil regained his courage. He lunged. I barely managed to hold my hands up defensively. Down, Nyen. Down. A deep male voice shouted suddenly. Neil's body ragdolled and he fell on the patio in front me. He had gone from 100 to 0 in an instant. Somehow, he had passed out. There was a strange older man standing outside the back door. His white hair was long and wispy, with a beard to match. He wore cargo shorts and a gray hoodie. He looked menacing and welcoming at the same time, giving off this immense aura. I stared at him in fear and confusion. "Relax, my child," the man started, taking a step closer to me. "I'm here to help." Nyen, was I could muster, looking at Neil's limp body. "Yes, that's correct," he spoke. I remembered hearing or reading about a deity when I learned about the Nyen's existence. This deity was the one who taught the townsfolk how to scare away the creature when it came down the mountain to feed every year. That is why Chinese New Year is filled with red, fireworks, masks, and everything that scared the giant creature away. Could this be him? As if he read my mind, the man spoke, "Yes." I gaped in awe. First, I was about to propose to the Nyen, and then I was in the presence of an actual god. You see, long ago, after I helped those townspeople, the Nyen came to me. He was miserable. Alone and starving up on that mountain top. He begged me to make him human so he would not be alone, the deity explained. I granted his wishes, on the condition that he gave up eating meat forever. If he faltered and gave in to his primal desires, he would instantly transform back into his original form, banned from seeing the humans ever again. My broken form stood there shocked at what I was hearing. Well, I best be off then. I will be taking the Nyen with me. It's my fault, I stuttered out, stopping the god from his departure. It was an accident. I switched our meals. The deity looked at Neil, then back to me. Is that so? Yes. Do not punish him, please. It was not his fault. He attacked and tried to kill you. Yet you still defend him, he noted. Why? Because I love him, I answered truthfully. The godly man took a second to mull everything over. Very well then, I will give him another chance. But he is going back to China, and you will never be able to see him again. Do you understand? The events of the last 15 minutes flashed in my head. Neil's bitter words echoed against my skull. Don't have to tell me twice. The god snapped his fingers. Neil returned to his human state and began to stir. I'll give you a minute to say your goodbyes. I nodded my head firmly and prepared myself. I had not planned for the night to end like this. For us to end like this. Oh my God, Neil muttered as he got up and looked at me and the mess surrounding us, Michael. I chuckled ruefully, grabbing the ring box out of my pocket with my good arm, chucking it at Neil. The lid popped open, revealing the diamond ring inside. What a night. I'm so sorry, was all he could say as he stared at the gorgeous ring I had picked out for him. He looked behind him and found the deity watching us. Neil turned back to me. All those things horrible, terrible things, I said. I do not know what to say. What can I do to make it up to you? You can't, I answered, my lips trembling. I cannot. We are over. Michael, I need you to know, I really do love you. I always have and I always will. You have to know that before you go. A tear slipped down my cheek. Goodbye, Neil. He bowed his head down in acceptance. Come on, it's time to go, the deity said. Neil and him then disappeared in a flash. The only thing left behind was my empty ring box. I moved out of Colorado shortly after. Quit my job, sold the cabin, and swore off dating for a while. After taking some time to heal and process, I got another, better, marketing job after I moved across the country to Orlando, Florida. I needed to get far away from the Rockies. I am in a great spot really. Smack dab in the middle of the city, right by Disney. Every night I am comforted by the fireworks show they have every night. I cannot sleep without those thundering loud booms now. So yes, that is why I do not trust vegans. There is always going to be that possibility that one day they will transform into a mythological creature and try to eat me.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.